So this week I'm going to start the podcast off a little bit differently than I normally started off. I normally started off by talking about something to do with the Edmonton Oilers, but this week, 2 days ago, we just had the concluding fight of the Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor trilogy, and there's quite a bit there to talk about, but I also want to talk about Islam Makhachev's fight to close out the podcast, which I will eventually. I just kind of wanted to drop a few notes about the McGregor-Poirier fight, because I really do think that for a change, I did make a promise a long time ago that I wasn't going to predict any more winners, or that I wasn't going to try to choose any more winners, and I guess I did with that particular fight. I think that eventually, in the end, I did make it pretty clear that I thought that Dustin Poirier was at least, if not the fighter of my preference, he was probably the better guy to win that fight. And so he did win that fight. And I think that the way that Conor McGregor conducted himself in the lead up to that fight and immediately after the conclusion of that fight, I think does kind of vindicate me a little bit on that. There were a lot of people that thought it was dumb to say that Poirier was the better guy to win the fight because he's obviously the better of the two men. In terms of, being like an ethical, actual human being. And I think what we're seeing right now with Conor McGregor is we're seeing almost like a third phase, like a phase 3 Conor McGregor. And I have to tell you that I don't like phase 3 Conor McGregor very much at all. Phase 1 Conor McGregor, I think for a lot of people's taste was bad enough. Phase 2 Conor McGregor, the gracious and ingratiating, very complimentary Conor McGregor, respectful Conor McGregor, I think that was a much better version of him. But this phase 3 Conor McGregor, the bitter, angry, whining, doesn't want to take any accountability for having lost, doesn't even want to admit that he's lost some of the fights that he's lost, let alone take accountability for the way that he lost them. It does not look good on an MMA fighter who's supposed to be, who's really supposed to be the master of his own destiny. So in McGregor-Poirier 3, he broke his leg, it was a doctor's stoppage. But to sit there and whine about that at the end of the fight, it's like, well, it was just so utterly confusing trying to figure out what he even thought that he was going to accomplish in doing that. What was he? Was he upset about the stoppage? Do you think that he was going to get up and keep fighting on a broken ankle? And then, of course, in that interview leading up to the fight, where somebody actually asked him about his losses, in particular his loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he says, "Oh, I only count the knockouts," and tries to disparage Khabib's record in the sport. Well, okay, admittedly, Khabib does not have. He doesn't have all of the elite fighters on his resume the way that a lot of other guys do. But the simple fact of the matter is that Khabib Nurmagomedov, he did in fact defeat Conor McGregor. And to sit there so long after the fact and try to play it off like it's not an actual loss, like there's really only, as in what? There's only one specific way that you can beat Conor McGregor, and if you don't beat Conor McGregor in that one specific way, then it doesn't count as a loss. This is a guy who has the wrong scale of values. This is a guy who values his ego far and above the amount that he values the sport, which is in turn the hallmark of somebody who's really here to take more from the sport than he gives back to it all in the way. And I think at this particular point, that's just not the kind of attitude that I can support as a fan. And it's strange because, even though I'm really disappointed with the way that Conor McGregor is conducting himself of late, I could not really say that I'm no longer a Conor McGregor fan. I just kind of wish that somebody close to him, somebody that he would listen to, maybe Coach Kavanaugh needs to sit him down and say, listen, your attitude is shit, and it's probably about half of the reason why you've lost these recent fights that you lost. I think that we could easily attribute one of these Dustin Poirier losses, directly to his attitude. I think that we could attribute the loss to Khabib directly to his attitude, at the very least indirectly. But the simple fact of the matter is that, something's got to change there. And I think that we can all safely say that until he does address his attitude, that it is definitely going to be perhaps an insurmountable obstacle to him becoming the kind of fighter that he used to be.